Hello and welcome back to Leftist Audio. Today is January 9th, 2021, and it is our third official episode. My phone's audio is on, speaking of Leftist Audio. Um, and today we've got three hot topics we want to bring up. Of course, we want to recap the election results, take a look at some of the exit polls, and just kind of speak to what that's going to mean for the future. Then we're going to talk about the insurrection. I think if you don't live under a rock, you probably saw the craziness that went down on Capitol Hill yesterday.
Wednesday.
Or Wednesday. Sorry, it feels like yesterday because I've still been seeing nothing but
like a year.
insurrection memes. And I don't want to get into this topic just yet. I do want to start with the election results, but can I just say how American my first thought was? Do I have to work during a seditious act? I was like, is work canceled, or are we free to just leave? But nope, we're just gonna keep going on and meme about it on Twitter. I can't think of something else that's more 21st century and more American than that.
One of my coworkers messaged me and was just like, "Hey, did you get anything done this afternoon, or have you just been watching the news like everyone else?" And I was like, I think we're all doing the same thing right now, which is just watching the news in absolute horror.
Absolutely insane.
Yeah, thankfully I was off work, so I got to stay at home and doom scroll the entire day, thankfully. But I couldn't imagine people like actually needing to be at work because, I mean, it was insane. Like, I mean, I wouldn't have been able to get anything done.
Can't relate.
But, let's talk about something a little bit more pleasant to kick it off.
Oh, definitely. We'll come back to the insurrection topic, and then our last topic we'll just close up with life after Trump and looking ahead. So all that said, let's hop into the election results. For those of you watching on Twitch, you should be able to see some runoff election results from NBC News. I'm just using them today because they had some pretty good exit poll information readily available so that we could take a look at some breakdowns of the demographics that came out, what people were concerned with voting for, that sort of stuff. I guess if you didn't tune into the last one, or you haven't even kept up with the election results, A, what are you doing? But B, both Democrats in Georgia have won the runoff officially. John Ossoff and Kelly Loeffler have both, and Kelly Loeffler, no. John Ossoff has won. Kelly Loeffler has lost, of course, to her opponent, Raphael Warnock. We officially have a majority in all three branches of the federal government for Democrats. So I'm excited to see what that means.
Liberal Raphael Warnock. You have to say it every radical liberal Raphael Warnock.
My mistake.
That's how he got elected. Yeah, because he's a radical liberal.
But I'm just gonna scroll through a few of these just to talk about it. I'm gonna look at John Ossoff's results because they were a bit tighter compared to the Loeffler Warnock battle for that Senate seat, and so it looks like, unsurprisingly, a lot of the counties that kind of showed up big were the Metro Atlanta ones. But notably, there's pretty good turnout from Bibb County, roughly 63% for John Ossoff, Calhoun at 59.2. Bibb County particularly has about 40,000 votes coming out of it, so that was a big turnout. I'm not going to name all the Metro Atlanta ones, but the biggest percentage for John Ossoff actually came seemingly from Rockdale County. Let me just double check myself here. Oh no, it's still DeKalb, Clayton at 88.4%. So never mind.
Yeah.
And
the notable thing about all of these is that they are extremely black districts with that is really what won Ossoff and Warnock. When we look at those numbers, the race was insane black turnout, especially in comparison to prior runoff elections. where there just wasn't that. And that was a conceited effort by the combined super team of Ossoff Warnock, was to bring out these black voters in Atlanta and Metro Atlanta, and it worked.
Give it up for Stacey Abrams. I really genuinely believe she's the hero of turning Georgia blue, both in the presidential election and in the Senate runoff. Um, just for reference, I think the last record-setting runoff vote in Georgia was like 2.2 million votes, and we just had a 4 million vote runoff. And I think that's almost entirely attributed to people like her, getting people out there to vote, and especially, like Brent said, the African American vote, that has been lacking in a lot of our elections. They came in big, especially African American women. I think 90% of them voted for Warnock, Ossoff, and Biden.
Yeah, we're
Which
about
is,
to
I
hop
mean,
into
that's
those
insane.
demographics, but definitely a shout out to them and everyone that built out the groundwork for that. Admittedly, as I mentioned on election night as we were covering the results coming in, I was very concerned about the turnout because it's hard to energize people outside of the federal elections. That's why those always had the biggest turnout, and even then, we still have pretty disappointing turnout as far as elections go.
And I
Just as
figured
far
people
as how
might be
many
burnt
Americans
out
vote.
after how crazy the primary, or not the primary, the general election was. I really was not expecting this many people to come out. I was probably expecting maybe like 2.5 million votes in the runoff. And the middle of the night, I was really predicting a split ticket, Warnock and Purdue, because I really thought Purdue just had the name stay power to win, even in the face of some tumultuous PR climate for conservatives right now and Republicans. But we
I
pulled it
think
out.
he had less controversy surrounding him than Loeffler, though, as well.
I mean, he
which
still
definitely
when you have to
benefited
run
him.
an ad that says "totally exonerated, no wrongdoing," that's not exactly.
Acquitted,
And then
baby.
yeah, like it's not
The Ray
exactly the
Lewis
best.
strategy. Yeah,
Eh,
gotta hit him with that Ray Lewis strategy. It's like, hey,
all right, you coming
quit it,
directly
quit
at me there. All right.
it.
Okay, so let's get into some of these demographics from the exit polls. So, as far as the male female breakdown, 45%, a little over because it rounded up to 46 in the graph on the screen. And let me zoom in for everyone in the chat. 45% of males voted for Ossoff versus roughly 54. Again, there's some fractions in there that voted for Purdue. While for women, for female voters, 55% came out for Ossoff versus 45 for Purdue. I don't think that's really too surprising, all things considered. But it is kind of interesting to look at that overall before.
So with these numbers, we're seeing a bit of a return to the mean with Republican and Democratic split voters. That's a lot more normal than what you would see out of the exit polls in 2016 and 2020, where Trump would lose with women pretty hard, but then would just dominate with men in general. And then, you kind of see that throughout all the numbers here, where, Ossoff ran a little bit better with the black vote, while Purdue ran a little bit better with the educated vote. And so it's kind of a return to normal, and this is just kind of the Trump is off the ticket effect. I don't even think it's a like Trump voters staying home or Trump voters um like turning on them. It's kind of just like, hey, Trump isn't on the ticket, so things are going to be slightly different.
Yeah,
Yeah, actually, I
agree.
wanted to ask you guys about what you guys thought about the results of this election, with it being so close. And I'm pretty sure Purdue did get slightly more votes than Ossoff in the general. Do you think that Trump's continued rhetoric about it all being rigged, about it all being, fake, that kind of thing, do you think that kept anyone home, any notable amount of people? Or do you really think this was, we still had an explosion for a runoff? Both sides were pretty energized and it just fell in Democrats' favor.
Personally, I think it probably did have an impact, but there was so much messaging around the importance of this election. I mean, I always attack ads I get in my mail. I think that it is possible, and there likely was some influence on that, but I don't think it's enough to keep someone that was already going to vote from going out and doing so.
Fair
I
enough.
think
What
it
about you,
really,
Nick?
I think, yeah, the after effects of the 2020 election, where, okay, yes, a lot of Trump voters still, I mean, to this day, think he won and is going to be in office. But in terms of like when you're looking at the vote as a whole, um, it's gonna be marginal. But I think just the momentum and energy coming off the fact that Georgia was blue in the 2020 general election was just too much for Republicans to overcome, because you are going to have just demoralized voters in Republicans that are kind of just like, yeah, we lost. I don't really want to turn out. And that's what happened. That's what's happened in every prior runoff just to the Democrats. It's like, oh, I saw that the Republican won by 5 points, Okay, yeah, I could turn out for this runoff, but what's the point? My vote really doesn't matter right here. I'd rather just get on with my work day. And so you'd see Republicans win by, like I said, 5 to 8 points in the general election, and then clean up with like a 15 to 20 point um, win in these runoff elections. And it just kind of just happened in reverse here, where the Democrats won in the general election. Republicans got kind of demoralized. They got unfocused with all the rigging and the insane messaging going on. Like, hey, is John Ossoff a Chinese plant? Or and is like, does Raphael Warnock hate America? It was just, or was the election rigged and it's going to be rigged again? There was just no cohesive messaging. Meanwhile, the Democrats moved in and said, hey, Warnock is a reverend. He's a man of God. He's moral, and he's just a nice guy in general. Ossoff fought corruption and is bringing you $2,000 checks. And that's really, I think, where the race turned around. Was those Trump came out for $2,000 checks, and Ossoff and Warnock immediately jumped on it, tweeted, hey, let's go get the $2,000 checks. And then Loeffler and Perdue just didn't have a response. They have to check with Mitch, like, hey, are we allowed to be for $2,000 checks here? Like, because I don't know. And so then, like, maybe a week before, they're like, yeah, we're for $2,000 checks. But we all know Mitch McConnell isn't going to bring that up to the floor. So we're not going to be that for it. We're not going to be demanding Mitch McConnell do anything about it. So it's not, you can't, voters were able to suss it out. And so it was just a lack of focus from Republicans.
I would agree with
I
that.
agree. If you had to pin this election, the loss for Republicans, on one person, is it Donald Trump or is it Mitch McConnell? Do you guys think that the dicking around with the stimulus, because a lot of people really are heated about the lack of stimulus response, so do you lay that loss at the feet of Mitch McConnell for being the ultimate obstructionist, the grim reaper as he likes to call himself, or do you lay it on Donald Trump in his endless rhetoric of it's all rigged, why participate?
I don't know. It's such a hard question, because they both contributed in very unique ways as like opposing forces, right? If Trump goes full force down there to Georgia and is like, "Hey, we lost, but um, Republican
Come
control
turn
of the
out
Senate."
to control or whatever. Stop the socialists from taking over Washington, to use
Yeah, and
their
like,
terms.
or like let's, what if Trump just said like, "Hey, I lost in 2020. They rigged it, but it's whatever. I lost. I'm running in 2024, and I need you to make sure that the least amount of damage possible happens over these next 4 years." Right? He comes out with a cohesive message about how important these runoffs are and drives turnout for it. They can win, right? Even with $2,000 check shenanigans. And then if Mitch McConnell, on the other hand, just says, all right, I'll give the Americans $2,000 if that means I get to control the Senate, whatever, man, that's fine with me, they might also win. So I can see strategies that either side could have played there between Mitch and Donald Trump that could have won them this election. but they chose neither, and it was kind of a perfect case scenario for Ossoff and Warnock.
I agree, and so to get back to the question, I personally would pin it on Trump more than McConnell. While I do, again, agree that both played a part in it, I think Trump was more visible, and his reaction, I think, damaged them a lot more than any of the legislative moves that McConnell. So,
well, thankfully he's less visible now.
We'll see.
For now, yeah. I don't know how long the ban is gonna last, but it definitely takes him, makes him less accessible.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like I said, I was tweeting about this earlier. I was like, I knocked a lot of doors. I'd go out every Saturday morning and just knock doors for Ossoff and Warnock, and it was just about the easiest door knocking I've ever done. When I could knock on a door, and when you're door knocking, you're going off of an app called Minivan, and that just has Democratic registered voters on it, and so most of the people you're going to see are very pro Democrat, just like, yep, I'm going to vote. And so you're just like, hey, do you have a plan to vote? Whatever, whatever. But every once in a while, you get that undecided door where they're just like, I don't know, man. We'll see. And it's about the easiest thing in the world to say, well, hey, $2,000. Do you want that? Yeah, and everybody wants $2,000, and so everybody was immediately positive. Like, it's the easiest door pitch in the entire world. So, yeah, and I think it worked and on the few undecided doors that I did knock.
Let's look back at some of these exit poll numbers here. Earlier on, Josh, I think you already called this out, or maybe it was Brent. Black voters really carried this election with 92% turning out for Ossoff. As far as the white votes, those primarily went to Purdue. I think that's pretty unsurprising for Georgia. 30% roughly turned out for Ossoff here. Then interestingly, maybe not. It's a little closer for the Hispanic vote. So that's roughly 64% for Ossoff, 36% for Purdue. And then the Asian vote as well at 59%, Ossoff 41%, Purdue. But
just looking at that African American turnout, that's the win right there in a nutshell. And moving forward into like 2022, the only way that we're winning midterms is getting those same results. Otherwise, I'm predicting a red resurgence to kind of fight back in midterms, just because midterms are already always lower energy than the presidential election. So I am hoping that we can keep that enthusiasm rolling, but I know people very quickly tire of politics, as shocking as it may be to the three of us and people watching this stream who actually like politics. But normal people do not want to be so immersed in politics just all of the time. So handing over control to Democrats for the next 2 years, if nothing landmark gets done, then I think a lot of that enthusiasm is just going to evaporate right out of the Democratic Party, unfortunately.
But what did I tell you, man? What did I tell you? We said, is voting for a Republican costing you $1,400? And I don't think the Democratic Party. I didn't think the Democratic Party was going to be a 50 vote for 2K checks. Their Manchin is so conservative, and we can talk about the fact that he might have to be. But I also don't think that a $2,000 check hurts him that much in West Virginia. West Virginia is the most, one of the most Trump voting states in the U.S., but Trump was for $2,000 checks. So he doesn't even have that excuse.
He's already walked back. He's already walked back saying that he doesn't want to pass more stimulus money. Immediately, once, the majority was declared, he was like, absolutely not. We're not doing it. And then, stock market, takes a little bit of a dip because he says that. He comes back the next morning, is like, whoa. I don't want to hard cross off $2,000 checks yet, that kind of thing. So
he's not used to that his conservative takes being the not good thing for
barometer.
the market. Yeah, he's
Yeah,
not
exactly.
used
Yeah,
to this.
he's the new barometer.
I will say, though, I think we're going to see some Republicans come out and vote for it as well. I mean, there were some that were also supporting it prior to the election. Now, was that just, them trying to poison themselves for their next electoral cycle? Who knows? But I think that we can expect some bipartisan agreement on that, and hopefully we can avoid poisoning the bill with writers such as...
I was about to say the biggest issue you have there is that in the not clean bill version, which is probably going to be a budget reconciliation bill that only requires 51 votes, but that means it's going to come with a bunch of other things that are Democratic priorities, like coronavirus distribution stuff, state bailouts, and things that Republicans have opposed in the past. It's not going to be a clean bill. I would love to pass a clean 2K check bill, but it doesn't look like that's what the Democrats want to do. So the question is, are Republicans really going to stay for it if you add in all of the other Democratic priorities into this bill? And then if they don't, are you going to be able to convince Joe Manchin that he should be voting for these 2K checks and along with unemployment relief? Because that's really what he was talking about. And it's classic conservative Democrat move is means testing. Every single thing that is relief provided to the American people has to be means tested, even if that means testing is going to cost more in bureaucracy than if we just gave people money, because the Democrats are just that stupid and frustrating. Is everything has to be big brain and we have to calculate everything. They can't just take the easy win where they have it. And it's the most frustrating thing about Democrats.
Yeah, and I think that's gonna just like on the 2K check issue, Lindsey Graham, even after the Senate majority was declared for Democrats, he's still adamant that there are, himself included, 10 Republicans that will sign on to the 2K checks. So it is very possible that we could see those 2K checks pass by themselves because there are enough Republican votes to hang on to that. But with all those additional Republican votes, assuming Lindsey Graham is telling the truth, which, I mean, that's a big assumption.
That is a stupid assumption to make.
That's a big what if. But let's give him the benefit of the doubt, right?
Why?
Let's just for the sake of arguing here, I'm gonna play devil's advocate. Let's say Lindsey Graham is actually telling the truth for once in his life, and that 10 Republicans do sign on to the 2K checks. That by itself, I could see it definitely getting passed, and I could see Republicans just leveraging that goodwill PR to keep those 2K checks out of, like you were saying, a much larger bill where Democrats are going to try to be stuffing a wish list, so to speak, into that bill. But the headlines, in the media would just say Mitch McConnell or Lindsey Graham or whoever blocks 2K checks to Americans, even though there could be a ton of stuff in that bill besides those checks. The headline is somebody, Manchin, McConnell, or like Lindsey Graham, are blocking the 2K checks, and that's easy down.
I think we'll have to see what the strategy is from Democrats coming in. In my opinion, it depends on what Biden. I'm not sure who all is going to get to set the sort of tone this administration's going to take. I would assume it'll be the Biden camp. And, they've spoken a lot to unifying the country, which is something I think we really need to do, especially after looking at Wednesday. And so I think we'll see if they want to show I don't want to call it a softball because we've been sitting here battling and fighting to get these checks, but if they want to throw a softball for a look at working across the aisle, they might do a clean bill where we get to have some bipartisanship in terms of passing it. Will that happen? I can't say, but I think it would be good for our country as a whole if that was one of the first things that comes out of this new administration. And it's just clean bill, shows some compromise. Well, not even really compromise, but just shows support from both parties to show that we are coming back together as America.
Matt Binder of the Majority Report had a really good tweet on this, and he essentially was like, Democrats have used their moderate members to give an excuse for not passing progressive legislation, saying like, "Hey, if we pass this, our moderate members are going to get killed." Well, now it's kind of they need to learn that the tables have flipped, and if they do not pass this progressive legislation, everyone else is going to get killed. Like
Yeah, the moderates
Ossoff
are
and
actually
Warnock,
going to get killed.
Ossoff and Warnock have promised, essentially promised these 2K checks for their wins, and they won. So they better put up or shut up, or
Well,
Democrats
okay.
can
I don't
expect to
think I
lose
don't think the
everything.
2K checks are that controversial. I think we'll definitely see that. I think if you want to refer to the more
You say that, but then Joe Manchin comes out and immediately says absolutely not.
Like I said, Joe Manchin walked that back really quick. I mean, like within like 8 hours of his statement, like it was the next morning, but still, he walked that back real fast because look, you've got the presidential administration, Joe Biden, multiple times was like, any stimulus that passes before I'm elected is a down payment on when I actually get elected. So you've got him who ran a big chunk of his campaign on, I'm actually going to help you, America. Then you've, like you've said, you've got Ossoff and Warnock, and there are lots of other left-leaning senators who have said, as soon as the Republicans get out of our way, that money is coming to you. So, I mean, it really is. It's time to put up because I think everybody, pretty much everyone with a D next to their name, with the exception of Manchin, has said the money's coming. So if he's the only one in the way, I don't think he's truly a big enough player to actually hold that up. Because, like I said, if you get a couple R's on your side, and there are some who have been for it the whole time. Could you remind me the name of the senator who's working with Bernie Sanders to do the standalone 1200s?
off the top of
Republican
my head,
senator. I'm trying
no.
to think.
But I know who
was
you're
it-
referring to.
It was either Wyden or Markey, I believe.
Yeah, one of those guys was working with Senator Sanders to get the $1,200 stimulus checks passed in a standalone bill. So you've got at least one Republican who has actually been working for it the whole time, and not just after this PR apocalypse that has hit the Republican Party over this last month or so.
It was Josh Hawley.
Like I said, okay, Josh Hawley. Okay.
From Missouri, for those of y'all not familiar. Not the most exciting state.
But hopefully there are enough people who are actually sincere about delivering that promise. And because I think that's something that more Americans care about politically right now than probably any other issue. I think 40% of renters right now are in danger of being evicted. So it's a tough time in America. And this is an easy PR win for literally everyone involved.
In my eyes, it's not a question of will it happen. It's a question of when and how. I think it's either going to pass with a bill with a bunch of riders that Republicans are probably going to just use in their next barrage of attacks, or it's going to be a clean bill, like I was saying earlier, where we make an attempt at some bipartisanship early on in this administration to show coming together.
Well, I think just going back to the fact that, Democrats just want a trifecta, it's the funniest thing for media narratives because the media has been so stuck on Democratic disappointment. Like, if you even remember 2018 midterms where they gained 40 House seats, the beginning of the night was they saw a few Democratic losses and they're like, all right, let's go. Democrats lose again. It's over. What Democrats in disarray. Oh my God. They just love that narrative so much. And so that's what they went with in the 2020, which, there was some disappointing things about it. But imagine saying Democrats are disappointed with maintaining the House, picking up the Senate, and picking up the presidency. It's just hilarious. And then they call it liberal media, like they call it left biased media. It's just hilarious.
Yeah, it's unreal. So
I think a lot of that comes from just the fact that it's easier for you to take broad shots at the right and Trump, and like you don't have to get into policy specific issues when you can just take those big hot take Republican bad over and over again. It's easier for the media, it's easier for left-wing content creators. It gets a lot more nuanced when Democrats are actually in control, and then you have to start picking apart policy instead of just going, "Oh, it'd be so much better if Democrats were in charge," and you can just sit around and go, "Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that be nice? Well, I guess we'll find out in 2 years if we can make it happen." That kind of thing. Where now we're back to like Obama had 2 years of full Democrat control. Now we get to pick apart policy. Now we get to get into the nitty gritty of it. Whereas it's so much easier to just keep pushing the doomer narrative of, oh, Republicans are still in charge, nothing's gonna get done, America's just gonna keep getting worse. Womp womp. Because negative press sells. I mean, that's the big push.
So while we're on the subject of negative press, I feel like this is a fairly good segue into our second topic of the insurrection that was occurring on Wednesday. You know, we already kind of touched on it. I still can't believe this has happened in our country. I didn't realize we were a banana republic and this was just going to be going on.
Yeah.
You know, I think
Absolutely appalling.
The worst part about it is how not surprising it was. It felt like, hey,
Is that because they told you months in advance that it was going to happen?
Well, yeah, literally. Like, you have this segment of the population and like 40% of the America saying this election was rigged, right? Like, think about the fact that if you genuinely believe in your heart that a deep state has rigged an election in the biggest democracy in the world, or what is supposed to be, we can talk about that, but like, what is the valid response to that? You know, storming the Capitol kind of sounds like a valid response to a rigged election with a deep state. But, you know, it wasn't. It literally wasn't. And the people pushing it know it wasn't. Ted Cruz understands that this wasn't rigged. Lindsey Graham understands this wasn't rigged. You know, but their base doesn't. Their base believes this. And so when you constantly tell a group of armed people that their government is being stolen from them, you can't be surprised when they try and take it back.
I don't think any of them were surprised. I think they. I mean, multiple reports have come out that Trump was delighted that this happened. Not that he was like, you know, shocked or anything like that. And Ted Cruz is feigning ignorance to keep his job is,
of course.
I mean, it's bullshit. Him and Josh Hawley both should be ejected out of a cannon into the sun.
No, but I'm telling you, this storm the Capitol thing, that is like genuinely shook like the Cruzes and Hollies.
I hope it did, because they are complicit in what happened.
Way into Congress, he didn't look too shook. He was like, "Whoa, we're gonna take back America."
Okay, but we went from the day before Holly being the media front runner for the 2024 Republican primary, if Trump didn't run, to now Holly is so untouchable because he just led an armed insurrection in the Capitol. While again, it's not surprising, these people, they did. So C4 dude in the chat says it didn't shake him. Pretty sure he still voted yes on all the objection still. Yes, they have to keep pushing this narrative. Are you telling me that this armed group of individuals that just stormed the Capitol, that is his base of the party, like they just showed him that they are serious about this, right? You know, they just showed Holly and Graham and Cruz that they're not fucking around. They truly believe what is coming out of these senators' mouths. And these senators now know, oh man, if I don't put up for this base, I'm done. Like, I'm done. And it's entirely removed their ability to be moderate because they think this is the only path forward for them in the Republican Party.
I know Loeffler gave up her objection. Did Purdue as well? Did they both just give up since they knew they lost? But either way, I mean, it's pretty unbelievable the fact that people are actually defending this. I mean,
Yeah,
the
and
fact that not everyone's universally calling it a terrorist attack. Some people are calling it a protest. Some people are calling it a riot.
you cannot call it a protest. You are so that it's just disgusting. I do want to derail briefly for what was personally my highlight tweet that got dug up as a result of this. Got it up on the screen. A great tweet from the one and only Fox Nation host Tommy Loren. If at real Donald Trump, now banned by the way, were to lose, he won't, in parentheses, his supporters will go to work tomorrow just as we do every day. When Biden loses, his supporters, she put in quotes, will likely loot and riot. Tells you everything you need to know. Hashtag Trump 2020. Needless to say, that did not age well, but I love that it was still brought up, and I love that we're calling people out for this.
Oh yeah, I have you seen how many people have been arrested at this point? Now, basically, any of the high-profile terrorists, those who had, pictures of them taken, like the dude walking out with Pelosi's little lectern stand thing. He just got charged with a first-degree felony. And
As it
thanks
should
to
be.
Papa Trump, yeah, as it should be. And thanks to Papa Trump's executive order from last summer about people tearing down Confederate statues and stuff, he'll be spending 10 years minimum in a federal prison. So that's pretty fucking awesome.
So let me take this moment, though, to talk about the fact that the Capitol Police let them in there.
Oh yeah,
100%.
Oh, yeah,
The
100%.
Capitol Police let them go in there because the Capitol Police support them. You have enough of those Capitol Police supporting the cause that was being protested out there. 88% of policemen voted for Trump, and you tell me 90% of Trump voters believe it was rigged. You're gonna have a super substantial amount of those police force supporting these protests and supporting the storming of the Capitol. And they'll do just enough to save their jobs. But many of them, like we said, we saw selfies. We saw the doors open for them.
They were just waving people in.
The biggest issue was the failure to deploy the National Guard. The fact that request was denied initially by the Department of Defense. If the National Guard was out there, if this was a Black Lives Matter protest, they would have been there. And that's absolutely disgusting for this country. If they were there, though, this would have never happened. It would not have gotten this far.
I use that to say that while, yes, these arrests are great schadenfreude, these arrests feel good and be like, yeah, these high, the people that we all saw in the news are now in jail. That feels great. But we're looking at less than 100 arrests for a stormed Capitol when the George Floyd protests came out with 14,000 arrests for largely peaceful protests. You saw entire groups of peaceful protesters kettled, beaten, and thrown in jail. And then on every nightly news, all you saw was footage of whatever slight amount of damage would happen in those things, because that's what got the views and that's what got the clicks, not the fact that these people were being beaten for expressing the fact or for fighting against the police brutality that they were themselves facing. And meanwhile, in the Capitol, you have less than 100 arrests, 14 on the day of. When you have a stormed Capitol where a bunch of chuds smeared shit all over the walls in the Capitol, they ran in with zip ties and mace like they were going to take hostages. And the only one died because they went a little bit too far. And then 3 others died because they were idiots. I know one tased himself in the nuts and whatever.
Actually, that hasn't been confirmed. It got a little walked back, but it was still a taser death nonetheless.
No, I'm confirming it right now.
But
Leftist Audio has confirmed that story.
Well, hey, careful. We're trying to keep our 100% so far with our Ossoff early call. So, but nevertheless, yeah, it absolutely disgusting. I don't know what else is left to be said at this point. We have to do some healing as a country, and we can't allow anything like this to ever happen again.
I heal by prosecution. That's how I heal. I heal via the system of the courts and seeing people go to jail. But no, in reality, we've got 5 people have died from the terrorist attack. One person was shot by Capitol Police after posting on Twitter or Facebook, I believe, that they can't stop all of us. You know,
And
and then you've got
frankly, even with the ones that were, not preventing this from happening, I will give it to them that there were not enough Capitol Police. It didn't really matter. They needed the National Guard and they needed the additional
well, it's like
support.
I said the day of. The Capitol Police can't be in 2 places at once. You can't be a part of the terrorist attack and also be defending the Capitol at the same time. So,
Well, some of them were, and some of
them.
them were still doing their job, and so I think it is unfair. I mean, we all the time, we always say as the leftists that hey, it's unfair to label a whole group for a loud or highly visible minority, and so some of those people are out there doing their job and still were. There just wasn't enough support from the processes that should have been in place.
So we have a taken chat from Vibe Lizard that. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead. Talk about.
It says kind of weird that libs are all for snitching to the FBI all of a sudden, and this is where I'd like to point out a distinction between libs and leftists. Leftists have been consistently beaten and assassinated and destroyed by these intelligence agencies. The CIA and the FBI, their job has been to monitor and take out many leftist organizations over the years, including things like BLM, where you saw the leaders were all on FBI and CIA watch lists for no reason other than speaking out against police brutality. While liberals will then use this insurrection attempt to greater fund these agencies. They will make it give an excuse because they'll use any excuse that they can to funnel money to police organizations rather than actually hold them accountable for their actions. So there is a distinct separation between libs and leftists in this regard.
No, I do agree, but I do want to circle back to what Aaron was saying. Some of them were actually trying to do their job. You're just severely outnumbered when you've got your own department working against you and the giant mob of people working against you. And while doing his job, one of those officers did actually die after having his head beat in with a fire extinguisher. So I do just want to bring up Brian D. Sicknick. He was the U.S. Capitol Police officer who died Thursday night after literally being beaten and then partially squeezed to death between the door and the mob. And you can actually hear on the video of him like being assaulted, the crowd, the mob, the terrorists, they're all going heave ho as they're like literally pushing up against the shield wall, and the cops are getting backed up into the door, and Officer Sicknick was actually getting like squeezed, like pressed into the door, had like blood gushing out of his mouth. So there were some of them who were actually trying to do their job. They were just severely outnumbered. And yeah, that's that death, the association with the woman who died inside the Capitol and the officer who died. Now every person who gets charged in relation to this terrorist attack has a felony murder charge now attached, or should technically have a felony murder charge attached to it.
Yeah, and I don't think the officer, as Toyota Echo pointed out in the chat, I don't think that was the officer who died specifically. Thank God that.
Okay, okay,
because that would have.
Yeah, that was gruesome. I mean, listening to his screams as he was being crushed was brutal.
But still, yeah, that officer that did die was beaten to death with fire extinguishers. Like,
yeah,
just absolute brutal insanity in the Capitol building, and the fact that
this is from the back of the blue crowd. These are from the people who who will tell you that it's unpatriotic to take a knee during a football game. These are the people who will tell you that if you weren't doing anything wrong, the cops wouldn't have shot you, that kind of thing. This is from that same crowd who bootlicks and stands the police so hard, and yet they literally killed a cop. Like I
Yeah,
don't know.
yeah, that's the Boogaloo Boys, right? The Boogaloo Boys have killed more cops than BLM. Throughout the BLM protesters, there wasn't a cop killed on the line of duty. Meanwhile, it took these fascists one day, one protest to kill a cop. And that's kind of an interesting thing about fascism in general, is that it's anti-state until they get into power, and then it's very pro-state. It's and so you can see that, now that they've been kicked out of power and don't feel empowered, they become kind of anti-state, where the police are supporting, tyranny, quote unquote, until they're in power, and all of a sudden the police is their personal security force against all of the left. And so it's an interesting dynamic there.
I can't wait to hear about the shadow government for the next 4 years and how that's just never going to disappear. It just boggles my mind. This happened in the United States of America. Like,
the crazy thing is that Trump's cult of personality isn't even just restricted to the United States. Going back up in chat a little bit, Don Quixote posted, happening right now, pro-Trump, anti-Biden march is happening in Tokyo. In Tokyo! Like, what, is Trump gonna go be Emperor of Japan next? Like, this is it's insane that this cult of personality has actually gotten outside of the United States. Like, I don't know how, if you were watching what just happened on Wednesday and you saw this go down in, let's say, like Colombia or another South American country or an African country, everyone go, man, look at that banana republic. That's crazy, man. Aren't you glad you don't live there? I couldn't imagine living in another country, looking at what just happened in the United States and being like, you know what? I am a Trump stan. I need to go out there and march for him. Even though he's not a part of my own government, he's not a citizen of my country. Let's go march for him. I don't understand how this disease has gotten outside of the United States.
So I'll say first, if only we had a historical precedent for fascism in Japan. If only there was some example that we could point to where fascism reigned in Japan, maybe on an Axis tilt. And yeah, just absolutely insane. And so we have a take in chat that we can talk about if we'd like.
Sure.
He says, I'm a strong believer in personal responsibility. I hear you guys talking about groupthink factions throughout the United States. How about you talk about people as singular citizens that will get what they deserve, continuing to reference people as this group, and that group is a major part of the conversation problem. And the thing is, you can talk about individual stories, but when we're talking about politics, we're talking about a group of systems. We're talking about something that inherently is going to apply to wide swaths or specific swaths of people. And so when you're talking about these things, people are acting in groups. And so you have a conversation about groups and how they act in comparison to one another. And so it doesn't take away from what you are as a person and your own personal choices, but you cannot sit there and talk about every single person and their reasoning for storming the Capitol that day. It's not possible, right? You can't sit down and interview every single one of them. So you're going to have to generalize. You're going to have to group people together, and you're going to have to talk about this because that's the only way you can you can find a solution. There is no solution that you can, okay, I'm going to pass a law for citizen number 93647, and this law is for citizen 2347. We're talking about systems that we are trying to develop to create the best society we possibly can. As C4 dude, a lot of these individuals make up their group. It is part of their identity. And you're not just one group, right? I'm a white cis het male, right? Each one of those groups is a distinct thing. And each one of those groups is going to be different and have a different impact on the way that I perceive life, on the way that life impacts me. And it's important that we talk about these things in generalities in some cases so that we can actually get things done.
The word you're looking for there is intersectionalism, and
Yeah.
it's like super important in politics. Um, to to look at groups of people just so black and white is almost trivial. You, any person, belong to a bunch of different groups, and that intersectionalism is what more, I guess, politically in-depth people would look at, rather than just being like, you're a Republican and that's it. Like, that's the only quantifying factor about you as a group. But I will say, there is one thing that every single person who stormed the Capitol had in common, and I don't care if you call it groupthink or what, they're all terrorists. That was a terrorist attack on the Capitol. So you can all group them together under that umbrella perfectly fine. Um, do I think that every single person that was there came with the intent to kill senators, to kill congressmen, that kind of thing? No. There were clearly some people who were there to actually kill people, hence them setting up a giant noose in front of the Capitol and chanting, "Where's Mike Pence? We're going to hang Mike Pence." Running in with zip ties and mace and that kind of thing. Sure, those people were probably there to take hostages, kill people, that kind of thing. But was every single person there to do that? No, there were probably some people who were there just to actually march down Pennsylvania Avenue, that kind of thing, and stand in front of the Capitol. And then we're like, oh shit, I guess we're all going inside now. And, whoop, especially once the police actually, open the gates up and let you in. But this idea that it's all just some broad generalization when you're condemning all of the people who were at the Capitol, I I don't think it is. I think it's perfectly adequate and fair to look at every single person who stormed inside that building who was there unauthorized as a terrorist. Um, so I think that's a pretty fair take. What about you, Aaron?
I I think I don't want to get too hung up on that. I think y'all really covered.
Yeah,
he agrees in the chat. But I do. We're coming up on like an hour.
Don't touch my honk for participating. Thank you.
Yeah.
We especially actually listening to the response to too often, I think, in our country right now. To your point about the grouping and being a part of the issue of the conversation, I think the political tribalism has gone too far. And so that said, I think we've pretty much covered that. There were a couple things in these demographics that were pretty unsurprising, but I do want to highlight before we move off this and transition to our final topic. In these exit polls here, there's a question: do you think John Off's positions on the issues are too liberal, too conservative, or about right? And this is everyone, not just people that voted for him. 5% of Democrats think he is too liberal. Of the exit poll amount, of course. And 95% of Republican voters, as identified by the exit polls, said he was too liberal. Unsurprising there. Too conservative, however, only 4% of people input this. Kind of weird that we're about 50-50 between Dems and Republicans, or at least Ossoff and Purdue voters in this. And then about right, 92% of Ossoff identified voters in this exit poll said that they felt his positions were about right. I just wanted to call that out.
And that might be the current barometer for Georgia. And I think what a lot of really left-leaning people are kind of having a hard time accepting is that Georgia did not jump into the deep end of the pool for leftism, so to speak. We're wading through the pool, and it's going to take a bit before we get to the deep end. So I don't think leftists should be discouraged by the fact that a lot of Democratic voters in Georgia think that John Ossoff is just right, when really, I mean, I just see him as like a centrist. I think it's just going to take time. And I would rather see repetition and a slow build of more and more and more progressive candidates in Georgia than trying to find someone who is a super justice dim to come and take Ossoff's spot immediately after Ossoff if that's not going to win the midterms, that kind of thing, the next election. Yeah, I mean, Ossoff, Vibe Lizard said Ossoff is a Republican. Yeah, I mean, he's a dino, Democrat name only kind of thing, centrist kind of thing. But you guys have to understand, the South is super, super red, very conservative. The fact that Georgia was able to pull this off is basically a political miracle. And
right,
I would rather not turn that train around just yet, you know?
I'm gonna go ahead and disagree with both of you.
Sure,
you know,
go for it.
Fun. So I'll start off with Ossoff is absolutely a Republican. Okay, listen, we're gonna have to contend with the fact that we have two parties right now. One of those parties is a fascist institution, and the other party is a massive tent from everyone that is liberal, literally capital L liberal, not fascist, to leftist right now. That's it doesn't mean it's always going to be that. It doesn't mean that that's where we where we were in the past. That means that's where we are right now, is that we have a party that is made up of a spectrum from liberal to fascists, and you can, or I mean, liberal to leftist. And you can look throughout history
here.
And you can look throughout history, and if you study it through the lens of, leftists, liberals, and fascists, that the liberals often contend with, often side with the fascists over the leftists in a lot of these cases. And so, no, I do not think John Ossoff is a Republican, because I don't think John Ossoff supports the fascist rule of Donald Trump, which most Republicans do. I don't think John Ossoff is a leftist either, because he doesn't support the good things about that the Democrats support, like, Medicare for all. I mean, other things. I do think that leftists can use liberals to move their agenda forward, and will have to work with them, unfortunately, to move there. And so the take it out, he would have been a Republican 30 years ago. Okay, maybe the 90s were a position where, yeah, these capital L liberals in the Democratic Party and neocon R's didn't have that much room in between them, right? You could say the same thing about Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney could have been a Democrat 30 years ago. Very much so. These parties have moved over the years, and they are going to continue to move. And it's the job of leftists to get the party as far left as they possibly can, because we truly do have a pure dichotomy. We have a pure dichotomy when it comes to our current American politics, and it's Republican and it's Democrat, and you're gonna vote for one or the other, except in super weird cases,
like Bernie Sanders. He's one of the few independents in the government.
So I'm gonna pose this question to everyone because it aligns with our final topic of life after Trump and looking ahead. Before we hop right into that one though, will the Republican Party recover? Yes or no? Just quick take. Josh, we'll start with you. Yes or no?
I mean, to give it just a hard yes or no, if I had to pick one or the other, I guess, yeah, it is going to recover to some extent. Do I think there's going to be some big time fracturing after this? I definitely think so. I definitely think Republicans are going to have to take a hard look in the mirror, and they're going to have to stand themselves apart from the fascist insurrection that we were looking at on Wednesday. And there are plenty of Republicans who have said, I don't know if there's a place for me in the Republican Party anymore. There are going to be Republican voters who feel that way. My goal, or my hope, is that it actually does split the Republican Party in half, and we're looking at two distinct parties, because that would allow the Democratic Party to split themselves in half, and you would have the true leftist party, and then you would have the liberal party, and then you've got your traditional conservative Republican Party, and then you've got the fascist party. So if America did end up breaking up into 4 political parties, I could deal with that.
Okay, so a follow up then. I don't want to get too in the weeds, so I'm looking for our soundbite, if you will.
Oh yeah, sure.
So do you see the Republican Party? So you said yes at the end of the day, right? You do think they'll recover just one way or the other. Do you think they will align or continue to align more closely with the populist Trump policies, or do you think that they're going to be just more? I guess I don't. I hazard to call it traditional Republicanism, but back to more what we saw prior to the cult of Trump.
I think we're gonna kind of see a quote unquote snap back to reality, as we're gonna try to peel ourselves away from crazy populist cult of personality. I think old people are, since that's the big base for Republicans, they always vote. They're always going to vote to those R's next to their names. I think the most interesting thing to look at going forward is going to be Republican primaries rather than Republicans in the general election, because I think the turnout is going to remain in the general election for Republicans. But it's going to be way more interesting to see what's happening in their primaries. Don't Touch My Honk just said, hasn't there been a pretty significant shift to voters identifying as independent, even though they're leaning one way or another? I do think that we're going to start seeing more independents. You're going to start seeing possibly some centrist candidates getting thrown out there trying to run as independents. Will they win? I couldn't say. Like I said, it's going to just be really interesting to look at Republican primaries.
So
So you're saying it's too early to predict, and we should just look at the primaries to make that determination.
I would love to get more. I'd love to talk about this more as we get closer to the 2022 midterms. But right now everything's so hot and it's so raw that I just
I think
don't
that's
know.
fair. That's a fair response, and I think a lot of it comes down to how the Biden administration tries to govern. If we're going to take our way or the highway approach, kind of like what we saw in the last 4 years, or if we are going to see that attempt at the bipartisanship conversation and moving back towards working together, if his rhetoric is going to match the way the administration wants to govern. At least in my eyes.
I really think it's going to depend on how much the Biden administration actually accomplishes. If nothing gets done for 2 years, like what happened in Obama's first 2 years when he had control of the House, the Senate, and the presidency, I think it'll be really easy for people to fall back into the Republican trap. But if a lot gets done, if the pandemic is squashed and the economy comes back booming, you could see some disaffected Republicans start looking towards more centrist candidates. Those dinos, basically, those guys who are they're Democrat on the ticket, but they're really basically just a centrist. So it will be interesting to look at going forward.
That's fair. Brent, again, I'm going to hit you with the yes or no, hard and fast response here. Will the Republican Party recover? Yes or no? Yeah.
So I'm gonna say, look at the historical example. The historical example of do the fascists win? Yes, no, is entirely dependent on liberals. Honest to God, the capital L liberals, it is entirely dependent upon them. And it's about who they work with. Are they going to work with the left to push progressive legislation to pull us out of the worst economic crisis potentially since the Great Depression? Or will they use austerity politics, infighting, and fear of the proletariat to work for the fascists essentially and move us farther right? Essentially, I think you can look at the voters right now across the board as split into two camps, which is think the system works and think it doesn't. And as the system has gotten more and more broken over the years, more and more are becoming convinced that it isn't. And those voters that isn't are either going to go to the left or go to the right, and they're going to go hard. And liberals need to make the case that the left is where it's at. The left is where we should go. And if they don't do that, the GOP is going to come back stronger than ever. And in 2024, they're going to run a smarter, better fascists, and it's going to win, and it's going to be devastating. So, and this is the historical example. Look at Nazi Germany. Look at Weimar Germany. Look at what the liberals did to empower the fascists and empower Hitler. And it's what we're seeing now, and how can the liberals use this economic crisis to further their movement or further us to the right? And so, also touching on a question in chat, hasn't there been a significant shift of voters identifying as independent? There is a shift of voters, and I put this up in the chat. The shift of the voters since 1993 has been about net 5 points or so, which is certainly significant, but not crazy significant. And most of them lean, and most of them don't. Well, they may split their ticket in the smaller races, but they're not going to split their ticket in the bigger ones. And so, because of the systems that America has created with first past the post, uh, you're going to see a two-party system until those change.
What about you, Aaron? How do you feel about going forward as we head from this election now into 2022?
I definitely think they'll recover. I think that we're just going to see the Republican Party move back more towards the center. In these exit polls here, if I were to come back to them for just a minute, if we look at the demographics that are voting, the younger demographic, and they even group this 18 to 44, like what a wide band here. 63% voted for John Ossoff, and it's a little different for Georgia, and again, this is an exit poll. This trend generally holds true when you expand it to a more national audience. In my eyes, I think that what this is going to do is it's going to mean that the party will have to shift back to a bit more normalcy to poll with that group as they continue to grow older. I know that young voters are very hard to get to turn up. That's why it's always honestly a bit of a joke in that the young votes, they'll come out and they'll poll really well, but then when it comes to actually turning those into real actual counted votes in your election, it's just difficult. But I think that still the trend will hold true, and that they'll be forced to either move more moderate on the Republican side, or they'll be kind of left behind, and we'll see a continued push from the Democrats, and they'll continue to take over just majority positions within the government. That's my personal opinion. I don't think that I think that the administration's actions on legislating, the Biden administration, of course, will have an impact on this. I think if they work together, that'll help ease the Republican Party back, because I think if they hardline, kind of like we've seen a lot from the right previously, they might feel even more encouraged to make a second attempt at being the populist, more fascist party.
And something that's not talked about enough with sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Well, no, I'm gonna derail us slightly, so go ahead.
Something that's not talked about enough with younger voters is the fact that these voters are often the poorest working class voters. Just kind of by definition, they haven't been in the workforce that long, and they have usually retail minimum wage jobs. They are kind of the voters most impacted by voter suppression in a lot of cases, where you don't have the polls open that on a single day. They can't get off work that day. And so the more access that you allow to polls and the easier you make it to vote, the more that you can turn out young voters in general. Because I know, and a lot of them don't want to do the more technical ones like vote by mail because they're scared they're going to do it wrong. I'm still scared voting by mail that I'm going to do something wrong and mess something up, and this is a lot of their first time voting. So they just want to go in on election day and vote. But a lot of times they get called into work and can't go do it. They can't get off their shift. And so it's about, one, education about the alternate ways to vote. And then two, allowing access to the polls, make voting a national holiday already. It's ridiculous that it's not. Make places of work be required to give paid time off to these workers to go vote. I know I'm lucky enough to work a full-time job where I do get that opportunity. We have a specific fund for people that need time off to go vote. Uh, it's something I don't think that's talked about enough. In the narrative, just becomes, oh, young people lazy, you know.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. To your point, I too am kind of lucky. My company has a specific bucket of time for that sort of action. We were able to get some time credited to ourselves, just a few hours to go out and vote. But I think that the real solution here is that it's well past the time that we need. We have to make voting day a national holiday. I think that it just makes sense. You know, either side of the aisle, it shouldn't be a partisan issue, but it is. But we should be supporting an American being able to exercise their rights to voting. That's why when people bring up all these barriers to voting, in my mind, you better have a really good reason to try and prevent someone from exercising their constitutional rights.
Oh yeah, I mean I agree. I don't think it should be election day. I think it should be election week. Early voting, at least where I early voted, was Sunday through Saturday, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Literally every day, 7 days a week. It needs to be like that just for the election. If you want to have early voting roll into actual like election day voting, but election day should be a week. It shouldn't be a day. That way, everyone actually has the chance to get over there and go and cast their vote. Should that Tuesday be a federal holiday so people can actually have the day off to go vote? 100%. But going forward, I think election reform is going to be extremely partisan because the Republican Party knows that if people vote, they lose. So I think going forward, you're going to hear a lot of talk about election reform from the Republican Party, but it's not going to be the reforms that we want to see. It's going to be about how many barriers to entry can we put up in front of being able to go and exercise your civic duty of voting. And Democrats are going to be trying to tear down those barriers. Republicans are going to be like, see, they want to enable another rigged election by tearing down these quote unquote protectors of fraud, that kind of thing, these barriers to entry. And I think it's going to get extremely partisan. And I think Democrats need to do something about it immediately while they still hold the majority. Because this is not an issue that you're going to get compromise on. Well, if you lose the majority in 2022, you're not going to be able to fix this last minute before the 2024 presidential election if you don't have the majority running through 2024.
Just
So
out
I
of
think this is something
curiosity,
Democrats should. Oh yeah, go ahead.
what was everyone's? I'm not sure how y'all decided to vote, but I went in person. Brent, it sounds like you went in person as well. What was your experience like voting for both the runoff and the federal election? Because I think it's two very different experiences. At least it was for me. So I voted in person for both elections. I voted early for the federal election on the first day. Early voting became available. I went down to a local polling place, and it took me, I would say, probably about 2 hours, if not a little longer. My memory's a little off at this point, and that was the first day of early voting, which was kind of new for me. Where I used to vote, if you voted early, you'd be in and out in like 5 minutes. I understand it was a hotly contested election. There's a lot of energy behind it, but I was just surprised. In the station, of course, once you got inside, it wasn't really a big deal. Everyone was masked up. I was very happy with the COVID precautions. We were actually distanced out, so that was good to see. So I had a pretty positive experience. And then in the for the Georgia runoff election, when I went and voted, I still voted early. Again, I am not an election day voter. I can usually plan ahead, and I try and do that just to cut down on the wait. And so I voted early in that one as well, and I was in and out in maybe 20 minutes. It was just so much faster, which made me pretty concerned for the outcome of the election, because I got in and out so much faster. I figured it was what I was worried about with the lack of energizing of the votes for a runoff. But I had a pretty good experience, and so I was just curious what y'all saw, since I know we're all a little geographically spread out. Oh, I will add one last thing though before I turn it over. I was very. It's gonna sound funny for the Dominion Machines narrative that we've had out here, but I really enjoyed the fact that with the new machines, I got a printout of my vote. I mean, that counts for, I mean, it could print anything and count it, but I got a printout of my votes where I could physically look and verify that everything was like I picked. It wasn't just a screen at the end confirming, hey, you picked these people, you voted for these things. But I got a printout that they then scanned, and then I saw the little machine count up on its count. So that's just my 2 cents on it. I appreciated the change there compared to the old card. Those like really thick gray cards. I know y'all know what I'm talking about.
Oh yeah.
And you can thank and praise Democrats for forcing those standards and forcing printout ballots from these machines. Because they did.
Well, you could also thank Brian Kemp for fucking with the last election that caused Georgia to be legally mandated to go to paper ballots. So shout out that fucker. But
yeah.
But no, sorry. Go ahead. I don't want to derail.
Yeah, Brent, what was your experience, and how did you vote in the federal and the federal and the runoff? I'm just really hung up on early voting. Everyone should vote early, in my eyes. Makes your experience much better.
So
be a planning Andy, as Vibe Blizzard says.
In the federal election, I voted. I voted right next to my place early in person. I did it because I didn't want to overwhelm the post office, with greater vote by mail. I knew vote by mail was going to be big, and I was like, all right, I can go out with a mask on, just be safe. And it took probably about 20 minutes at my local library. Not that bad a line. And then in the runoff election, so I have my apartment as my voting address, and I had just moved it to my apartment rather than my dad's house because I graduated college. And I lost my driver's license. I just physically lost it. And so I ordered a replacement, and the address on there is still my dad's address. And so when you order a replacement driver's license, apparently that just automatically updates your voter registration. So I went to the same library to vote, and they were like, yeah, you're not registered for here. And I'm like, what? And they're like, yeah, you're not registered. And I'm like, okay, what happened? And they're like, yeah, you're registered for back over there. It switched over on the day that you changed your license. Okay, whatever. So I couldn't take off work again until the day of. So I just went day of to my local polling place, and there was literally not a line. I walked in, walked out, and that scared the shit out of me. Where I was just like, I'm in Gwinnett, which, if you know, is kind of one of the turning points as Georgia has turned blue. It was somewhere that Clinton actually picked up in 2016 in Georgia. So it was kind of been the helm. And so to see almost nobody there was like, oh no, on election day. But it just shows how
you
good
mean by the runoff, right? Nobody was there for the runoff or for the primary?
Yeah, for the runoff.
Okay.
And yeah, Brooksy saying in chat, I didn't have a line in Gwinnett either on election day. Okay, so that's good. See, I didn't go there on election day, so I didn't know. I had just been there. The last time I had voted there was 2016, and there was or 2018. I'm sorry, and there was a pretty substantial line at that point. So I was worried, but we'll see.
For me, I voted early both times. Also voted in Gwinnett. The first time for the general election, I think I voted like a week and a half or 2 weeks before the general election. And it took me maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes. There was a decent number of people inside, but there were a ton of voting stations up. So it was very easy for me to just hop in line, fill everything out, and then just go ahead and get my vote done. I was very paranoid, actually, to be totally honest, about double, triple, quadruple checking that my ballot said Joe Biden and not Donald Trump. Then got my ballot printed out, fed it into the Dominion machine, which I don't know how everyone's experience went, but the way that they had the vote collectors at my polling place, It was like this computer built into the lid of like the dumpster that you walk out to the street every week to get your trash collected. So I did think it was kind of hilarious that I was
That is kind of
basically
fitting.
inserting my
I
vote
think
into
I
the
made a
trash.
reference to that
Yeah.
to the group I went with.
But the second time I went to go vote for the runoff, it actually took me longer to fill out the piece of paper, and then for them to hand me the card to go use the machine than it did to like vote. And I think all in all, it took me 5-6 minutes maybe. So for me, both times when I voted, I was in and out so fast. I didn't really think of it at the time. I wasn't like, I guess, hoping and expecting that there'd be a huge crowd there, but I was in and out almost immediately. It was extremely easy. I would encourage literally everyone to go vote early, especially with all the attacks on the post office. I just didn't feel comfortable um,
Yeah,
trying to get a
for
mail-in ballot.
everyone.
I ordered a mail-in ballot that never came to my apartment.
Oh,
Um, so they actually made me sign a piece of paper when I voted in the general election, canceling my mail-in ballot that never arrived to me. Um, but other than that, other than my mail-in ballot not actually getting to me, the voting process was super easy. It was super fast, and everyone that was working there was actually super nice. So I would 100% encourage early voting.
I'm really glad that you went through the process. Well, obviously, I'm not glad you didn't just get your mail-in vote like it should have happened.
Yeah,
But I'm glad they had a process in place that worked to make sure that you were squared away to get everything sorted.
It actually still
Which
hasn't arrived, believe it or not. That ballot may never get here. Probably will never get here.
They knew better than to give you one. But
Anyway,
but I'm
it's
curious.
Democrat.
Do y'all typically vote in person or do you vote by mail? I generally vote in person. A couple times I have voted by mail just due to convenience, and so is that the same for y'all? Personally, for me, for these most recent elections, there was too many questions brought up about the mail votes, and so I felt like I needed to go in person. So maybe that rhetoric kind of worked against President Trump at that time because I really made an effort to make sure I was there in person. Of course, I normally do go in person anyways, but I considered voting by mail.
In the 2016 general, I voted by mail. I had no qualms with it. It's not like there was the big, mail-in ballot fraud, debacle going on in 2016. So I voted with no trouble by mail in 2016 and in 2018, and was planning to do so yet again in 2020, but my ballot just didn't get to me. And if it had gotten to me, even just like late October, I still would have gone in person because it was just too late at that point. But in general, I don't have any qualms of voting by mail. It was just with everything that was going on, it was just too important for that ballot to possibly get lost in the mail. I had to make sure that my vote was counted in person. So I made sure to get in there and vote early in person this time, even during the pandemic.
Yeah, I didn't want to worry people, so I wasn't like going around telling it, but I've never voted by mail, and voting by
Okay.
mail just like I just don't feel like doing it. I like going in person day of, It's kind of sentimental,
It's
but
fair.
I wouldn't tell anyone that because I don't want them to be afraid to vote by mail, and I am kind of like the political person to a lot of my friend group, and so I didn't want to project that sort of fear onto them. I'm like, yeah, vote by mail. It's totally safe. It's totally fine. Just me personally, I might be a little. I'm not superstitious, but I'm a little stitious. I just like the process of going and voting. And I'm not the only one. Like I said, I was knocking on doors, and a lot of people we're just like, hey, I'm like, hey, what's your plan to vote? And they're like, I'm going day of, and I'm like, hey, have you thought about voting early? And they're like, yeah, I just kind of like to go day of. It's kind of just what I've done. It's what I do. I just kind of like to do it. And I'm like, yeah, I sympathize with that. I empathize with that.
Yeah.
But we should obviously continue to push everyone to vote by mail and early because you never know what could come up day of,
Mm-hmm.
right? You get into a car crash on the way there, you're incapacitated. The ambulance isn't going to stop by the polling center, and let you vote. So you gotta get out there and vote as early as possible.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there are a lot of older people, like my parents, who are very like dead set on voting day of, that kind of thing. Um, and a lot of that Republican turnout is day of. Whereas, if we start looking at the numbers from the general election, the early voting group and the mail-in voting group, those were Democrats. And that's kind of how it schismed for this election. But going forward, I'm hoping that we can build some more confidence and trust again in our post office after all the attacks of the last year. And I hope more people are excited to either vote early or vote by mail. That way, voting is less of less of a nuisance. I hope to people, like, if you have that free time on a Saturday and you see that your polling place is open until 7 p.m., why not go vote? Why not? You're not doing anything Saturday afternoon. It's like you might be cramped for time on that Tuesday morning, that kind of thing, trying to go vote before you go to work, that kind of thing. Look, I had a free Saturday both times, general and runoff. I made sure to go in there, get my early vote done, get it out of the way. Because I looked at it like I have to vote one way or another, whether it's on election day or whether I vote early. I may as well get it done as soon as I possibly can, because that's not hanging over me. And you feel like $1,000,000 after you vote. So
I was gonna say,
yeah,
I think we all missed the best reason to go vote. You can get your sticker and do your
hell yeah.
selfie shot to make sure everyone really knows, hey, I voted. Yo vote. Like,
yeah, get that internet clout from voting. Let's go. Actually, I don't know if either of you guys got this, but I really like the little stylus that they handed out this year.
Oh yeah, I love that as well. I did not want to touch that machine because I was like,
yeah, me neither.
There's so many people coming through here. My polling station, by the time I got there, they have a little like I think all of them do this, but a little whiteboard where they're like, this station has processed however many votes. It was like 14,000 or something. And I was like, you know who doesn't want to touch that machine during a global pandemic? Me. Yeah. And so I like that I had the little thing, the little stylus where I could press everything. Again, good experience. Really glad that we adapted. I mean, I'm always concerned. I mean, I look back to the governor race with Abrams and Kemp, our Secretary of State at the time, who just made no effort to either open up polling stations or just keep it managed.
How could America become a banana republic as it has its secretaries of state overseeing their own elections? I never could have seen this coming.
There's no conflict of interest there, Brent. Come on.
No, not at all.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm glad we all had good experiences. I just wanted to check. I know there's a lot of information out there where it can be varying. Your mileage may vary depending on your polling place and your location. That is good to hear. I did have one more topic, but I know we've been going for like an hour and a half, so I'll just ask y'all if you want to keep going. There is one last topic I had on my list, but it'll probably be a big one, so we can also
save it. But what you got?
I wanted to ask, should the moderates be forced more left? And I wanted to talk about Justice Dems, moderate Dems, and everything kind of in between there.
That is a long conversation that I really want to get into with the two of you, because I know I'm probably going to have to be the moderator for this next topic. I say we shelf this and we pick it back up with the next podcast.
Yeah, everybody out there, that's a preview for a fight.
Preview for episode 4 when we record that one.
I will say
we've got some
differing views on that, so we're actually going to get into probably one of our first really big debates. I'm going to let the two of them go at it. I'm going to have probably opinions agreeing with each of them on certain kinds of certain things, but I want them to both prepare for their side, because I think this can be a really juicy topic, especially as we're looking forward to 2022. So I think this will be great to pick up on next time. All
right. Well, all that said, thank you to everyone that tuned in. had pretty good turnout for this one, and thank you all for being really interactive with the chat.
Bless you.
Y'all actually asked some good questions, and you were willing to listen to the response as well. So not something you see from your average Twitch chat, let me tell you. So thank you all for that. Thank you for everyone listening at home on the podcast that's going to come out of this. You can follow us on Twitter at Audio Leftist. Sadly, we're not Leftist Audio, but we're working on getting the tag. But follow us on Twitter at Audio Leftist so you can get updates on when we're going live. We're going to try and get a more concrete schedule as we keep doing these, and also continue to become less and less scuffed. I think this episode was pretty good. I think the scuff meter was like down here.
We're getting it.
But,
we're getting it.
Yes, shout out Anchor. Brooksy32 said shout out Anchor. Yes, we're uploading the podcast through Anchor, so it's on literally everything: Spotify, Pocket Cast,
search out
Apple,
Leftist Audio.
Google Cast. Yeah, literally anywhere where you can listen to a podcast, it's up there. Just tell your friends, share it with all the people you know. Be annoying. Let's get people excited about politics.
And for those of you that might be podcast only listeners, the Twitch stream is the same as where we are everywhere else except for Twitter. One day we'll get that handle. It's just twitch.tv/leftist audio. So again, thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next one.